Throughout the centuries, there have been stories that blend history and legend. They spoke of a werewolf in the heart of the Vatican, of Romanian peasants who unearthed corpses to drive stakes through them or chain them to their graves, and of a pyramid submerged beneath the Sea of Galilee, discovered in the 21st century. In this video, I'll tell you 6 legends you've probably never heard of, stories that will make you wonder whether they were merely inventions or if they truly happened. Get comfortable, and welcome to Behind the Story. The Werewolf of the Vatican. The pontificate of Urban VIII, which began in 1623, marked the height of the Roman Baroque era. Under his rule, the city experienced an unprecedented wave of monumental projects. Palaces were built, St. Peter's Basilica was adorned, and great artists like Gian Lorenzo Bernini were commissioned. Yet, beneath this artistic splendor lay a much darker reality. Pope Barberini concentrated almost absolute power in Rome, strengthening the Inquisition and censorship offices, turning the Vatican into a place where the visible and the hidden coexisted side by side. Among the things meant to remain hidden were certain disturbing episodes that never appeared in official chronicles but left traces in private letters and rumors whispered among the people. Rome, during those years, was a city of deep contrasts. The magnificence of papal ceremonies stood in stark contrast to the poverty of the common districts. On top of periodic famines came outbreaks of disease and endemic crime, which the papal guards struggled to contain. In this atmosphere of tension and everyday fear, any strange event quickly took on a supernatural tone. It was in this context that reports began to appear of corpses found in unusual conditions near the Vatican. These incidents occurred in vineyards and gardens close to the papal grounds, areas that were guarded but still open enough for things to happen beyond control. The first discoveries, toward the end of the 1,620 seconds, caught the curious attention. They were not typical murders or revenge killings common in Baroque Rome, but deaths with characteristics that didn't fit any known pattern. Bodies found at dawn by guards or workers showed deep tears, missing limbs, and marks some described as bite wounds. These details were recorded in internal reports, but kept strictly secret. What baffled investigators was the apparent animal-like savagery of the attacks. This, in a place where wild beasts had been driven out centuries earlier. As the number of cases grew, so did the concern. For Urban VIII, maintaining the image of order was crucial, especially as the papacy sought to project authority amid the 30 Years' War. The fact that these killings happened so close to the heart of Christendom was unacceptable. The Pope ordered discreet investigations by the Swiss Guard in the Holy Office. The instruction was clear: uncover the truth without causing public alarm. Ironically, this secrecy only fueled the myth. The more the Vatican tried to suppress information, the more suspicion spread among those aware of the events. Reports began pointing toward one of their own, a Swiss guard of German origin, whose behavior had become increasingly erratic. He often disappeared during his watch and was said to fall into fits of uncontrollable rage. Fellow guards testified that during those episodes he seemed possessed by a wild frenzy, unable to recognize orders or distinguish friend from foe. The fact that these incidents coincided with full moons sparked rumors that he was responsible for the killings. Vatican physicians offered an explanation that sounds strange today, but made sense in the medical and superstitious frameworks of the time, a condition known as lupine melancholy. It described individuals who, under certain lunar phases, fell into states of madness, violent outbursts, and insatiable hunger. Though rudimentary as a diagnosis, it gave the inquisitors a justification for such an unusual case. Between 1630 and 1633, at least a dozen deaths were quietly attributed to this guard. The victims were always found before dawn, their bodies mutilated by what looked like claws and teeth. No official documents ever mentioned these crimes, but private correspondence among lower clergy referred to a predator within the Pope's walls. Thus, the case of the soldier shifted from suspicion to legend, nurtured by the deliberate silence of the Vatican. The papal court's official chroniclers only vaguely mentioned violent deaths in the area, never naming victims or offering details. The censorship was absolute. Nothing could tarnish the image of the Holy See, whose moral authority rebuilt after the Council of Trent depended on its appearance of order and purity. But the more they tried to hide it, the faster the rumors spread. In Vatican corridors and Roman taverns alike, people whispered about a monster that hunted inside the papal walls, something no authority dared acknowledge publicly. The contrast between official denial and everyday rumor helped solidify the myth. Silence became fuel for imagination. Eventually, the situation could no longer be ignored. According to internal documents never officially published but referenced in private letters of the time, the Swiss Guard captured one of their own after catching him in a state of frenzy in the papal gardens. He was restrained with great difficulty. Reports claimed he possessed the strength of several men. Once imprisoned, he was kept in underground cells awaiting a secret trial conducted by the Inquisition. Unlike its usual public trials, known for pomp and spectacle, this one was held in total secrecy. The verdict was execution carried out privately. There was no public burning or display, as with heretics or criminals, but a quiet death in some forgotten corner of the Vatican's catacombs. His existence was erased from official records to avoid scandal. Oral accounts, however, claimed the execution took place around 1634 inches, a ceremony attended by only a few cardinals and guards, after which the soldier was buried in an unmarked crypt. In that era, an anonymous burial was considered a punishment worse than death. It meant eternal oblivion. From then on, the legend of the Werewolf of the Vatican was born. Clerics and servants began referring to him as Il Lupo della Santa Sede, the Wolf of the Holy See. What the archives concealed was kept alive through whispered stories that the guard, driven by a mysterious illness, had murdered and devoured his victims under the full moon, that the church executed him in secret, and that his restless spirit still roamed beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Over time, these stories blended with other tales of strange happenings in the catacombs, turning what may have been a hidden crime into one of the Vatican's darkest myths. By the 17th century, when Europe's fascination with Vatican secrets was growing, letters and journals from scholars and diplomats began mentioning suppressed documents about a mysterious guard executed during Urban VIII's reign. Though unproven, these accounts fit perfectly with the Church's culture of secrecy and strengthened the idea that the Vatican hid far more than it revealed. During the 18th and 19th centuries, especially under the Romantic movement, the legend of the Vatican werewolf gained new life. Anti-clerical writers used the story as a symbol of Rome's corruption and hypocrisy. Some pamphlets even described the Vatican haunted not just by cardinals but by ghosts and monsters, while travel guides claimed locals had heard howls echoing beneath St. Peter's. These whispers persisted for centuries, passed quietly in Roman taverns and cafes, never officially acknowledged but never forgotten either. Even today, the legend of the Vatican werewolf remains one of the most chilling tales tied to papal secrecy. Though no official record confirms it, its endurance comes from a perfect mix of truth and mystery, unexplained murders during Urban VIII's time, a vanished soldier, and an institution that wields silence as its greatest weapon. For many, the myth represents the shadow beneath the Baroque splendor of Rome-hidden tunnels, silenced crimes, and a creature, half man and half beast, said to still guard the depths of St. Peter's Basilica. In modern tours and whispered traditions, some Vatican workers even claim to hear strange noises in the underground galleries, as if the Wolf of the Holy See still lingers there, not as a real being, but as the eternal symbol of the secrets that will never be fully revealed. The pyramid buried beneath the Sea of Galilee. In 2013, a team of Israeli archaeologists specializing in underwater archaeology announced a remarkable discovery in the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Kinneret. Using high-resolution sonar technology to map the lake bed, they detected a massive formation that could not be explained as a natural feature. The structure had the shape of a cone or a flattened pyramid, standing more than 10 meters tall and measuring over 70 meters across at its base. What caught everyone's attention was its composition: huge basalt stones arranged deliberately, some weighing several tons. From the very beginning, it was clear that this was not a geological formation, but a human-made construction of enormous proportions, submerged at a depth that made direct access extremely difficult. The sheer size and layout of the structure amazed specialists. With a diameter of more than 70 meters, it was larger than many known burial mounds in the region and comparable in volume to megalithic monuments in Europe. The use of basalt, a hard, volcanic stone abundant in the Galilee area, implied a colossal effort of organization and transport. Moving and stacking such massive rocks would have required careful planning and significant manpower. Its conical or pyramidal form resembles funerary or ritual structures found in other cultures of the ancient Near East. Yet this one stands apart for its enormous scale and for the fact that it lies underwater, making it an even greater mystery. Dating the structure has been a matter of intense debate. Although no direct excavation has taken place due to its depth, cost, and the fragility of the environment, archaeologists estimate that its construction could date back thousands of years. Some calculations place its origin in the 2nd millennium BCE, when Canaanite settlements around the Sea of Galilee practiced rituals related to fertility and water worship. Other, more cautious researchers suggest it might belong to an even earlier period, linked to Neolithic communities that lived along the lakeshore more than 6,000 years ago. The absence of physical excavations prevents any definitive conclusions, but all scholars agree that this is not a minor relic, it is a monumental work whose true purpose remains unknown. The Sea of Galilee itself, the site of the discovery, is a place steeped in history. It is the largest freshwater lake in Israel, fed by the Jordan River, and has long been vital to the region's development. Along its shores, archaeologists have documented Neolithic villages, Canaanite cities, Hebrew settlements, and, centuries later, Greco-Roman towns. Each of these cultures left behind material traces, proving continuous habitation and showing the lake's strategic importance as a source of water, fishing, and trade. In biblical tradition, the Sea of Galilee is remembered for events from the life of Jesus, adding a spiritual dimension to its archaeological value. Finding a gigantic, human-made structure at its bottom only reinforces the idea that this lake is far more than a natural resource. It is a hidden archive of human history in the Eastern Mediterranean. Since the announcement of the discovery in 2013, the academic community has remained cautious and largely silent about the submerged structure. This silence is not deliberate neglect, but rather a reflection of the real challenges involved in studying it. Access would require professional divers trained in underwater archaeology, substantial funding, government permits, and strict conservation measures. The structure is covered by layers of sediment, making analysis with heavy machinery extremely complicated. As a result, despite the magnitude of the discovery, official reports have remained limited to technical publications without public debate or large-scale excavation projects. This gap in information has created the perfect space for popular imagination, local beliefs, and ancient legends to resurface with renewed strength. It's worth remembering that the Sea of Galilee has always been surrounded by myths. Long before the discovery, Bedouin tribes living in the region told stories about a city lost beneath the waters. According to their tales, a prosperous city once stood on the lakeshore. Its inhabitants grew arrogant and defied the heavens. The punishment came swiftly. The city was swallowed by the water in a single night, leaving no trace on the surface. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, were told around campfires and became part of an oral tradition in which the invisible ruins beneath the lake served as a moral warning. When the 2013 discovery was made public, many local residents saw it as confirmation of what their grandparents and great-grandparents had always said, that beneath the Sea of Galilee lies the memory of a civilization that was punished. The legend of the punished city is not just a tale of pride and ruin. It's connected to an even older tradition that ties into the biblical and pre-biblical myths of the Nephilim, the giants born from the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men, mentioned in Genesis 6-4. According to the biblical texts, the Nephilim were destroyed in the Great Flood, but oral traditions throughout the Near East claim that some survived, hidden in caves, mountains, or beneath the waters. In the case of the Sea of Galilee, the submerged pyramid was said to have been built precisely to imprison what remained of that bloodline. The most widespread version holds that beneath the basalt stones lies a sealed chest containing the heart of the last Nephilim, torn from his body and sealed away so it would never beat again. The myth is even more specific. That heart was not a dead organ, but a core of power, a source of energy tied to the fallen angels themselves. Bedouin storytellers described it as an immortal object, still throbbing beneath the water, guarded by the weight of the stones and the silence of the lake. For them, the day someone removes the rocks and opens the seal, the heart will begin to beat again, and the sea will part, releasing the ancients who will once more walk the earth. This warning connects the archaeological discovery to one of the most feared traditions of the region: the belief that the origin of human violence began with the forbidden union between the divine and the mortal. That is why what archaeologists view as a structural mystery is, for the keepers of oral tradition, further evidence that the waters of Galilee hide not just history, but an ancient curse. The link between the pyramid and the Nephilim is crucial to understanding the power of the legend. Genesis, in its 6th chapter, briefly mentions that, in those days there were giants on the earth, descendants of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. The canonical text is cryptic, only a few lines, but it has fueled the imagination of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions for millennia. Apocryphal writings such as the Book of Enoch expanded on this story, describing the Nephilim as colossal, violent beings who devoured crops and men, born from the transgression of the fallen angels. The flood, according to those versions, was not only punishment for moral corruption, but an attempt to wipe out a hybrid race from the face of the earth. Yet oral traditions insisted that not all perished. Fragments of that lineage survived, hidden in remote places or sealed beneath earth and water. The submerged pyramid in the Sea of Galilee, according to Bedouin accounts, was precisely such a monumental seal built to contain what remained of that forbidden blood. Inside, they said, lay not a full body, but the heart of the last Nephilim, torn out in a ritual act and placed inside a stone chest. The image is haunting, not a corpse, but a living organ still pulsing, though motionless, feeding the lake's silence with its dark energy. For local communities, this idea explained why the Sea of Galilee had such a unique aura. It wasn't just a lake, it was a liquid tomb, a calm surface concealing an unfathomable danger. Some even believed that the sudden storms recorded over the lake, even in biblical times, were caused by the faint beating of that sealed heart, still struggling to free itself. The curse associated with the Nephilim's heart was passed down with precision. If the chest were ever opened and the heart began to beat again, the sea itself would break apart. The waters would retreat like an inverted flood, not to punish mankind, but to release the ancients. The giants will walk the earth again. The elders would whisper in their stories, an echo that blended the memory of Genesis with the fear of an awakening that could never be contained. Thus, the pyramid was seen both as proof of human power capable of imprisoning a descendant of the fallen angels, and as a warning against disturbing what had been purposefully buried. It should not be opened. It should not be studied. The balance of the world depended on its remaining hidden. These warnings circulated for centuries, especially among the Bedouin tribes who roamed the lakeside. For them, the Sea of Galilee was both sacred and dangerous. No one was to venture too deep into its mysteries. Fishing and trade were permitted, but exploring the depths was seen as defying the will of God. Some families refused to camp on certain shores, convinced that on moonless nights one could hear a distant, muffled sound beneath the water, like the beating of a buried drum, the echo of the imprisoned heart. Young people were taught that the lake could give life, but could also claim it if anyone dared to cross the lines set by their ancestors. This blend of religious belief, ancestral myth, and communal fear made the tale of the giant's heart one of the most enduring legends of the region. In modern times, after the 2013 archaeological discovery, these warnings regained strength. Skeptics see it as mere coincidence between ancient folklore and a scientific finding. But for many who live in the nearby villages, the submerged pyramid was final proof that their ancestors had been right. Beneath the Sea of Galilee lies not just an archaeological mystery, but a forbidden secret that must never be touched. What science calls a structure of carefully stacked stones, legend calls the last prison of humanity's first cursed bloodline. Across the centuries, the legend of the submerged pyramid and the Nephilim's heart survived through oral storytelling among Bedouin camps and villages. Each generation added new details. Some claimed to see greenish lights rising from the lake at night. Others swore that during storms the waves struck the shore harder because the heart below was stirring. These tales were not mere entertainment. They were moral warnings that blended faith, fear, and tradition. The drowned city became a symbol of what happens when humans defy the divine, and the sealed heart a reminder that pride can bring ruin not just upon one people, but upon all of humanity. With the coming of the modern age, and especially in the 19th century, European travelers exploring Palestine and the Jordan region recorded echoes of this legend. Some wrote in journals about the wild stories of Bedouins who spoke of sunken cities and giants trapped beneath the water. Though scholars of the time dismissed these tales, They were preserved in secondary sources, ensuring the legend was never completely lost. The romantic fascination with the mysteries of the East only strengthened its appeal. Europeans saw the Sea of Galilee as a landscape heavy with biblical symbolism and a perfect setting for dark ancient legends. Today, the 2013 archaeological discovery has breathed new life into the myth. Media outlets and enthusiasts of alternative archaeology have linked the submerged structure to the legend of the Nephilim's heart, presenting the pyramid as evidence that ancient oral traditions had a real foundation. Tour guides in Israel and the Palestinian territories include the story in cultural tours, and online forums are filled with theories mixing archaeology, the Bible, and conspiracy. While archaeologists insist on the need for rigorous study, local people maintain their warning. If they open it, the sea will open, and the ancients will walk the earth once more. And so, the myth lives on, not only as an echo of the past, but as a lasting warning about what happens when humanity tries to uncover secrets that perhaps were never meant to be revealed. The Vampire of Sighișoara, Romania. Sighișoara, located in the heart of Transylvania, was in the 17th century one of the best preserved Saxon-founded cities in Central Europe. Established in the 11th century by German settlers, invited by the Hungarian king to strengthen the region's defences, the city still maintained its medieval appearance well into the modern age: stone walls, watchtowers, cobbled streets, and a social hierarchy marked by the presence of artisans, merchants, and noble families of Germanic and Hungarian descent. Beyond its commercial importance, the city had gone down in history as the birthplace of Vlad Tepes, known as Vlad the Impaler, in 1431. Although this fact had no immediate relevance in the 17th century, it gave the town a historical background that, centuries later, would link Sighișoara forever to the vampire myth. During the 17th century, Transylvania was under Habsburg rule, incorporated into the Austrian crown after centuries as a semi-independent principality on the frontier of the Ottoman Empire. This border position deeply shaped the region's cultural and religious life. Orthodox Romanians, Catholics, and Protestants coexisted, each with their own funeral customs and beliefs about the afterlife. Within this context, the idea of the restless dead vampires, revenants, and wandering spirits was deeply rooted. Superstition was reinforced by collective experience. Each new outbreak of plague or mysterious disease revived fears that the dead were not resting in peace and had returned to harm the living. In popular imagination, vampires were not yet the refined aristocrats of later Gothic fiction, but bloated, active corpses that rose from their graves to torment the living. The burial practices of the time reflected this mindset. Parish records from various Transylvanian towns describe how bodies were exhumed weeks or months after burial to check their condition. If corpses appeared unusually fresh or had blood at the mouth, something we now understand as a natural result of decomposition, it was taken as undeniable proof of vampirism. To prevent the deceased from returning, drastic rituals were performed: stakes driven through the chest, heads severed, or bodies burned. Far from being isolated practices, such actions were legitimized by collective belief and in some cases tolerated by local authorities. Sighișoara was no exception. Historical records suggest that by the mid-17th century, exhumations for such purposes had taken place in the city, solidifying its reputation as a place where the real and the supernatural overlapped. The lingering memory of Vlad Tepes added a symbolic weight that was impossible to ignore. Though in life he was not considered a vampire, but rather a ruthless ruler and fierce enemy of the Ottomans, his nickname Draculaea. son of the dragon, and his bloody reputation continued to circulate in popular imagination. By the 17th century, as Central Europe began developing tales of vampires associated with Transylvania, the fact that Sighișoara was Vlad's birthplace only strengthened the association between the town and the ominous. The local population viewed that heritage as a reminder that evil could take human form and that the shadows of the past still lingered. In this atmosphere, when strange events began to occur in the town cemetery, they could only be interpreted through the lens of the supernatural. Thus, the stage was set for the legend of the vampire child, a story that would forever mark Sighișoara's popular memory. Around the mid-17th century, during Habsburg rule, the city witnessed an event that became the core of its most enduring legend. In one of the town's noble families, according to oral traditions recorded centuries later, a child was born under unsettling circumstances. From the very beginning, the birth was seen as an omen. The newborn had a rare trait teeth at birth. Today, medicine recognizes this as natal teeth, an uncommon but natural phenomenon. At the time, however, it was seen as a terrible sign. In Transylvanian folklore, a child born with teeth was believed to be marked by dark forces, destined to become a strigoi, a being that, after death, could return as one of the undead to torment the living. Because of their social standing, the family tried to keep the matter quiet, but in small communities, rumors spread quickly. Midwives, servants, and neighbors whispered that the birth had brought a curse upon the household. In a society where religion and superstition were intertwined, having a child with such a sign could easily be seen as divine punishment or proof of a dark pact. The child lived only a few months. He died prematurely, most likely from the common infant illnesses of the time. Yet his early death did not calm people's fears. On the contrary, it deepened them. For many, the fact that he had been born with what was seen as a cursed mark meant his soul would never find peace. He was buried with Christian rites in the parish cemetery, but even then, some parishioners murmured that he would not remain at rest. Soon, the rumors intensified. Shepherds working on the hills near Sighișoara claimed that on nights of full moon they had seen the pale silhouette of a child wandering near their flocks. At dawn, several sheep were found weakened or dead, with wounds on their necks and traces of blood. Although these deaths could easily have been caused by wolves or disease, the cultural context led many to suspect something far darker. The coincidence between the nocturnal sightings and the loss of livestock was enough for the townspeople to believe that the child had returned from the grave as a vampire. These stories spread rapidly, repeated in taverns and marketplaces, growing more detailed with every retelling. Some claimed to have heard the cries of an infant echoing through the night. Others swore they had seen tiny footprints in the snow near the graves. Fear began to settle deeply into the community. In rural societies like 17th century Transylvania, the premature death of children was always surrounded by mystery and fatalism. When such events were combined with elements considered supernatural, a strange birth, rumors of apparitions, and unexplained animal deaths, the conclusion seemed inevitable. Something evil was at work. The figure of the child born with teeth who returned from the tomb became a shared story, a supernatural explanation for everyday misfortunes. The local nobility tried to downplay the matter, but peasants and shepherds kept the legend alive, convinced that something dark lurked beyond the town's fortified walls. To make matters worse, around those same years, Central Europe began recording the first medical and theological treatises about vampires in Transylvania. By 1725, the famous report Visum et Repertum had circulated across Europe. Written by Austrian military doctors, describing exhumed corpses in Serbia that appeared intact and were staked through the heart out of fear that they were vampires. These reports, amplified by newspapers and diplomatic correspondence, reached towns like Sighișoara, reinforcing the idea that what happened in their cemetery was not an isolated incident, but part of a much wider phenomenon. The combination of European cultural anxiety, local tradition, and specific unexplained events gave the story of the noble child, born with teeth enough weight to survive through the centuries. Over time, the rumors not only refused to fade, but grew stronger. By the mid-18th century, in 1754, the situation reached a breaking point. Shepherds continued reporting strange losses of livestock, sheep found drained of blood or with small puncture wounds on their necks. Peasants walking near the cemetery claimed to see small shadows moving among the graves and to hear what sounded like a child's cries in the dark. In an age when superstition held social legitimacy, such testimonies were not dismissed as exaggerations, but taken as serious warnings. Popular pressure on local authorities became unbearable. The community demanded a final answer. The city's clergy, torn between maintaining calm and responding to the fears of their parishioners, eventually gave in. Permission was granted for the exhumation of the child's body. This procedure was not unusual in 17th century Transylvania. In fact, records from nearby villages like Brasov and Vichy show that in similar cases, graves had been opened and anti-vampiric rituals performed. The difference was that in Sighișoara, the case involved a noble family, which made it far more delicate. This was not a nameless peasant, but a member of a respected lineage. Even so, collective fear outweighed family honor. When the tomb was opened in 1754, the townspeople, peasants, clergy, and municipal officials found something entirely unexpected. The coffin was empty. There was no trace of the child's body. This detail, preserved in oral accounts and later recorded in local chronicles, caused widespread panic. For some, it confirmed that the child had risen from the grave to torment the living. For others more pragmatic, it was a case of grave robbery, perhaps for occult purposes, or a secret reburial carried out by the family to avoid public disgrace. Yet among the townsfolk, the first explanation was the one that prevailed. The child had returned from the dead. The mayor of Sighișoara, aware that fear could easily turn into unrest, decided to act swiftly. In an act that was both political and symbolic, he ordered the tomb to be sealed with a cast-iron cross placed directly over the burial site. In Central European tradition, iron was believed to have apotropaic power, the ability to repel evil spirits and contain the restless dead. Installing a metal cross was at once a religious gesture and a practical safeguard against evil. The mayor's intention was clear: to reassure the people that the situation was under control, that the evil had been contained, and that there was no reason for further hysteria. But the measure failed to completely calm the townsfolk. The fact that the coffin had been empty left too many questions unanswered. Had the body truly vanished on its own, as the most superstitious believed? Had someone from the family secretly removed it to avoid a public scandal? Or had it been stolen by those who practiced dark rituals? Every hypothesis only added to the growing myth. The physical emptiness of the tomb transformed into a symbolic void, one that popular imagination quickly filled with increasingly fantastic stories. From that moment on, the vampire child of Sighișoara ceased to be just a rumor whispered by shepherds and became a regional legend, spreading beyond the city walls. Later retellings even claimed that during the sealing ceremony, mourners heard faint cries coming from beneath the earth, leading some to believe that the iron cross had trapped the spirit rather than freed it. Others said that ever since that night, during the coldest winters, the cries of a baby could be heard around the cemetery, reinforcing the belief that the child's soul was still wandering. These additions, impossible to verify, were part of the natural process of oral storytelling. Each generation added new details to keep the legend alive. What is certain is that the exhumation of 1754 and the empty coffin marked a turning point. The myth of the Vampire of Sighișoara could no longer be erased from local memory. After the events of 1754, oral tradition ensured the story would never die. Locals claimed that on freezing winter nights, the cries of a baby could still be heard near the sealed grave, a sound that blended with the wind among the walls of the old fortress. For the superstitious, this was undeniable proof that the child's spirit remained trapped in that place. Others said they had seen small shadows moving between the tombstones, or tiny footprints pressed into the snow. Though such experiences could easily be explained by natural causes, the townspeople interpreted them as direct manifestations of the vampire child. Thus, the legend became inseparable from local folklore, passed down from parents to children both as a warning and as a story of identity. In the 19th century, as Europe grew increasingly fascinated by the folklore of Eastern Europe, German and Hungarian travelers recorded in letters and journals the case of Sighișoara as an example of vampire superstition. To the Enlightenment-era intellectuals, such stories revealed the persistence of medieval mentality, but to the Romantics, they were precious material for the rising Gothic imagination. It was in this climate that authors like Bram Stoker, at the end of the 19th century, found fertile ground for his famous novel Dracula. Although Stoker never mentioned the vampire child of Sighișoara directly, the fact that the city was the birthplace of Vlad Tepes and the setting of such chilling legends helped solidify its dark aura and tied it forever to the universal vampire myth. Today, the legend of the vampire child lives on in Sighișoara, woven into both tourism and local identity. Guided tours through the walled city, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, include references to the 17th century exhumations and the anti-vampiric rituals once practiced in the region. The sealed tomb with the Iron Cross, though its exact location remains uncertain, is still part of the stories told to visitors. Beyond its touristic appeal, the legend acts as a mirror of another time, an era when the line between the real and the supernatural was blurred, and when collective fears found explanation in the idea of restless dead returning to punish the living. The myth of the Vampire of Sighișoara, born from a child with teeth in an empty coffin, shows how a single event can evolve into an enduring legend, one that has survived for more than 3 centuries and continues to fascinate all who hear it. The Faceless Woman of the Inquisition, France. The Albigensian Crusade, launched in 1209 under Pope Innocent III, was one of the bloodiest episodes of the Middle Ages in Western Europe. Its declared goal was to eradicate the Cathar heresy, which had taken deep root in southern France, especially in the regions of Languedoc and Toulouse. The Cathars defended a dualistic vision of the world, rejecting the authority of the Church of Rome and gaining significant influence among the local nobility. This made them not only a religious problem but also a political threat to both the papacy and the French crown. The crusade was brutal. Entire cities such as Béziers and Carcassonne were razed to the ground, and thousands of people, many of them innocent, were massacred without distinction of age or status. Within this violent landscape, Toulouse occupied a central role. The city had long been a bastion of Cathar belief, and after the military defeat of the Albigensians, it became a laboratory for inquisitorial control. It was there, in the 1,230 seconds, that one of the first permanent seats of the Inquisition was established, led by the Dominican order tasked with pursuing heresy using systematic methods. Toulouse soon filled with tribunals, records, and prisons, where suspected heretics were interrogated and punished. Trials were often summary in nature, and a mere accusation from a neighbor could be enough to bring someone before the inquisitors. In this oppressive atmosphere, women were particularly vulnerable. Their subordinate social position, combined with suspicions that they might secretly spread heretical teachings, made them easy targets. Women associated with Catharism suffered especially cruel fates. Many were accused of being perfects, or parfaits, female religious figures who practiced strict asceticism and served as spiritual guides. To the Catholic Church, which denied women any kind of religious authority, their very existence was seen as an intolerable threat. The persecution went far beyond questions of doctrine. Women were accused of witchcraft, of making pacts with the devil, or of spreading plague and misfortune. Public executions served as both punishment and spectacle designed to terrorize the population and suppress any lingering sympathy for heresy. In Toulouse, records describe pyres where women were burned alive based on accusations never proven, their names erased from official archives, wiped out as a warning of what awaited anyone who defied the established order. It was in this climate, around the year 1230, that a case emerged which did not fit the usual pattern of repression, and would later give rise to one of the city's darkest legends, the woman without a face. In a narrow street near a Dominican convent in Toulouse, the body of a woman was found, her identity unknown, her death horrific. Her face had been completely removed, leaving behind a disfigured corpse impossible to recognize. What was most disturbing was that, according to the fragmentary records that survive, there were no traces of the killer and no clear explanation for the crime. It was not an official execution, no inquisitorial record was made, and it could not have been a public lynching, since no witness claimed to have seen or heard anything. It was, in essence, a body without a murderer and without a cause, discovered in the very heart of a city under the control of the Inquisition. The mystery, combined with the horror of a faceless corpse, quickly became the seed of fearful stories that would, over time, merge with religious processions, medieval superstition, and the collective terror of inquisitorial power. The discovery of that mutilated body in Toulouse in 1230 caused a shock that could not easily be concealed. It wasn't just the brutality of the act, a body stripped of the very feature that gave it identity, but the fact that, in a city under constant surveillance by the Inquisition and patrolled by local guards, no one had seen or heard anything. In an era when the Church documented every heresy, every suspicion, and every punishment, the absence of any recorded culprit was deeply unsettling. The act of removing someone's face carried a deep and terrifying symbolism in the medieval mind. To strip away the face was to strip away the soul. A person without a face was seen as nameless, soulless, and cut off from the Christian community. The crime, therefore, had not only taken a life, but condemned the victim to a kind of social and spiritual erasure. The lack of culprits or witnesses gave rise to several interpretations. Some whispered that the murder had been committed by the Inquisition itself, an example meant to inspire fear without leaving any trace of official responsibility. The fact that public executions were meticulously documented, while this killing appeared in no record at all, strengthened suspicions that it had been a clandestine punishment. Others claimed it was divine retribution, that the woman had committed such grave sins that God himself had torn away her face to mark her shame. And there were those who believed darker forces were at work, demons or restless spirits drawn to the city's atmosphere of fear and repression. The absence of any rational explanation left an empty space for collective imagination to fill, producing a multitude of unsettling versions of the same story. In medieval symbolism, the face held immense power. It was not only the seat of identity but the visible reflection of the soul. Theologians wrote that purity or corruption could be seen in the eyes. Therefore, to lose one's face was considered a punishment worse than death itself. During inquisitorial trials, public humiliation often included exposing the condemned person's face at the stake so that everyone could look upon their shame. To find a faceless corpse, then, was like discovering a being erased from creation, a living metaphor for the loss of dignity and salvation. It is no surprise that soon afterward, people began to believe the woman had returned from the dead, a faceless spirit wandering the streets of Toulouse as a reminder of those who had suffered under the Inquisition. The rumors spread quickly. Some said she had been secretly executed by the Dominicans, accused of heresy but omitted from official records. Others whispered that she had been the victim of a personal vendetta carried out by an inquisitor who had acted outside the law. Whatever the truth, her disfigured body began to appear in oral stories as a warning. In the weeks following the discovery, reports began to circulate of a strange figure seen during religious processions. It was said that a woman would appear among the crowd, silent, motionless, watching the young women from the shadows. She never spoke, never gestured. She simply stood there, her presence cold and impossible to ignore. Because she had no face, no one could identify her or follow her once the procession ended. The legend claimed it was the same woman, returned from beyond the grave, seeking justice or vengeance. That she appeared during religious processions was deeply significant. In a society where faith shaped every aspect of public life, introducing a figure of terror into a sacred ceremony meant introducing fear into the heart of social order itself. The woman without a face was not just another ghost, she was a defiance of the church's control, a silent accusation that even faith could not hide what had been done in its name. Rumor became presence, presence became warning. There were things, people said, that neither the stake nor the censors could silence. From that time on, Toulouse was marked not only by the real violence of the Crusade and the Inquisition, but by a legend that embodied fear, silence, and the impossibility of escaping an imposed fate. Over the years, the image of the faceless woman became more defined in popular imagination. According to stories passed down through generations, her apparition was linked to moments of great religious solemnity, particularly during Holy Week or festivals dedicated to local saints. In the middle of the processions, among believers carrying candles and banners, some claimed to see her, a woman dressed like the others, in dark, modest clothing, but with no features on her face. Her face, they said, was not empty darkness, but a smooth, pale surface, as if the skin had stretched across where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. The mere thought of it was enough to inspire terror, because what should have reflected a soul had become an expressionless mask. What terrified people most was her invisible gaze. According to tradition, anyone who dared to look directly at her blank face would not escape unharmed. Physical contact wasn't necessary, just a few seconds of eye contact were enough. The following day, the person would begin to show signs of madness, hallucinations, screams in the night, an inability to tell what was real and what was not. Some were said to have torn out their own hair or failed to recognize their own families. In a time when insanity was interpreted as either demonic possession or divine punishment, these accounts only strengthened the collective fear. No one wanted to risk looking into the face of the Faceless Woman. Eye contact with her, people believed, was a sentence of damnation. This growing fear gradually transformed the behavior of the people of Toulouse. During processions, many began avoiding eye contact with unfamiliar women, especially widows, strangers, or anyone dressed unusually. A kind of visual self-censorship took hold. Don't lift your gaze too high. Don't stare at others' faces. Don't look more than necessary. This shift was not mere superstition. It mirrored the social repression of the time. In a city under inquisitorial control, where even a gesture could be interpreted as heresy, the woman without a face became a symbol of surveillance, a reminder that anyone could fall from grace, lose their identity, and be erased from existence, just like the unknown victim of 1230. Her legend echoed the very real violence that had shaped life in Toulouse during the 13th century. Over generations, the story ceased to be a simple recollection of the murdered woman and became a moral tale told in homes and neighborhoods across the city. By the late Middle Ages, it was told to children as a warning: never defy the church's authority, never stray from the processions, never play near the cemeteries, for the woman without a face might appear and drive them mad. The story also worked as an allegory for inquisitorial repression. In a society where being accused of heresy could mean social disappearance, the Faceless Woman came to represent all those erased from history, stripped of their name, dignity, and memory. Thus, the legend served a dual purpose: to frighten and to remember. It preserved, in symbolic form, the memory of a violence that official records had tried to silence. During the 14th and 15th centuries, a few late chronicles mentioned, in vague and cautious terms, the appearance of a faceless lady walking the streets of Toulouse. These accounts did not describe her as a tangible ghost, but as a recurring vision during religious festivals, proof that the myth had taken deep root in the city's collective memory. As time went on, the fear of supernatural punishment fused with the memory of the Inquisition's cruelty, reinforcing the idea that Toulouse was a city forever haunted by its executed dead. With the rise of Romanticism in the 19th century, the legend was rediscovered by French writers fascinated with the Middle Ages, an age they saw as filled with mystery and tragedy. For the Romantics, the woman without a face was not merely a terrifying ghost, but a symbol of human suffering under oppression. Local authors began referring to her as La Femme Sans Visage, the Faceless Woman, turning her into an emblem of inquisitorial brutality and of women's vulnerability in a society ruled by ecclesiastical power. From that point onward, her story entered the pantheon of France's Legende and Norse, the dark legends, alongside tales of ghosts, apparitions, and unholy miracles. Today, the woman without a face still lives on in Toulouse's collective imagination. Though the city is now a center of art, science, and modern culture, its old quarters continue to whisper her name. Night tours and local storytellers still recall the legend, guiding visitors through narrow streets said to be haunted by her presence. Some residents of the historic district even claim that during the Holy Week processions, a strange figure can still be felt moving silently among the crowd, a woman who watches without eyes and whom no one dares to look at directly. For historians, she is the echo of a forgotten crime from the age of the Inquisition. For the people of Toulouse, she is proof that the ghosts of medieval repression have never truly disappeared. The Demonic Twin of Cain. Long before the biblical texts were written in their final form, the Mesopotamian world already told stories about the origins of humanity, stories that spoke of primordial pairs, brothers, twins, or doubles, who represented the tension between life and death, fertility and barrenness, order and chaos. In Sumerian and Akkadian tablets preserved in libraries such as Nineveh's, we find the idea that everything created had an inseparable opposite. Deities like Enki and Enlil were described in relation to their counterparts, and even the goddess Inanna Ishtar embodied dual aspects: the life she gave and the destruction she brought. Within this symbolic framework, it's not surprising that later oral traditions and written texts began to suggest that even the first humans had doubles, invisible twins, or shadows that personified what could not be expressed directly in the official sacred stories. The canonical biblical accounts, such as Genesis, focus only on Cain and Abel, the first two named sons of Adam and Eve, after their expulsion from Eden. However, apocryphal texts and ancient Jewish traditions add more complexity. The Book of Jubilees and certain versions of the Midrash mention that Adam and Eve had many other sons and daughters besides Cain and Abel children, who were erased from written memory because they weren't considered central to the story of salvation. These forgotten accounts suggest that early humanity was far more complex than the simplified narrative preserved in the Bible. Among these versions, some introduced the idea that there were other brothers, some linked to the continuation of life, others to forces of destruction. And it is here that we find the figure of Cain's dark twin, a being absent from the official Bible, yet hinted at in Mesopotamian sources later reinterpreted through oral tradition. According to these sources, Cain was not born alone. He shared his birth with an invisible brother, a shadow, a spirit, or an energy without form, representing the reverse of his existence. This twin was said to have no body, only presence, manifesting through dreams, visions, and whispers, influencing Cain's character since childhood. This idea fit perfectly with the Mesopotamian worldview, that nothing existed in isolation. Everything required its opposite, even if that opposite was unseen by human eyes. Tradition gave this being a name, Urgam, a word that, in later oral sources, was translated as the hidden brother, or the buried twin. Urgam does not appear in the Bible, but his name is linguistically linked to Akkadian roots, meaning foundation or origin, and Gem meaning shadow or twin. He was described as the first demon born of humankind, not created by God, but emerging as the residue of imperfect creation after Adam and Eve's fall. Without a body of his own, Urgam fed on his brother Cain's emotions, his frustration, jealousy, and resentment. Thus, this invisible twin became the dark voice that followed Cain from the very beginning, a constant echo pulling him toward violence, the true instigator, according to the legend, of the first fratricide. In the canonical stories, the childhood of Cain and Abel shows a clear contrast. Cain, the farmer bound to the earth; Abel, the shepherd guardian of the flocks. But in the pre-biblical and Mesopotamian versions, this difference wasn't only economic or symbolic, it was spiritual. From a young age, Abel was said to have experienced dreams filled with light visions that revealed to him the importance of obedience and sacrifice. Cain, on the other hand, lived with a constant whisper, a voice that came to him at night or during moments of silence, urging him to look at his brother with distrust. That voice was Urgam, the invisible twin, the hidden brother who had never received a body, but who fed upon Cain's thoughts. The tradition says that while Abel dreamed of light, Cain saw dry fire and barren lands, as if their destinies had been marked from the beginning. Cain's bond with the soil, far from being neutral, became the channel for Urgam's influence. The ground, after humanity's expulsion from Eden, had been cursed by God. Adam was told he would earn his bread through toil, working a soil that yielded only thorns and thistles. In that ungrateful earth, Cain labored endlessly. Every failed harvest was a reminder that he was condemned. Urgam fed on that frustration. Every drought, every withered plant, every futile effort made the invisible twin stronger, nourished by Cain's despair. While Abel offered lambs that were always accepted by the divine, Cain brought forth fruits of the land offerings ignored or rejected. This unequal treatment became the perfect ground for Urgam's poison to take root. Your brother is favored because his blood has worth. For the earth to accept you, you must give it blood. The resentment toward Abel grew, but in this version, it wasn't merely born of envy, it was cultivated through years of subtle manipulation. It is said that Urgam appeared to Cain in dreams, taking on shifting forms, sometimes as a shadow, sometimes as a dark mirror where Cain saw his own distorted reflection. He whispered words Cain could not ignore, that the true sacrifice was not of fruits or animals, but of human blood, that only by offering Abel's life could divine favor return. Thus, the demonic twin was not an accident in history, but a constant, patient presence shaping Cain's mind until he believed his destiny was to shed his brother's blood. The crime described in Genesis, Abel's murder in the field, takes on a completely different meaning in this version. Cain did not act out of sudden jealousy, but after years of inner pressure, a slow poisoning of the soul by Urgam's whispers. The murder, then, becomes not just an act of envy, but a ritual sacrifice, the first one demanded by a demonic voice. When Cain struck Abel, he was not merely committing a crime, he was answering the call of his shadow. In this retelling, the first fratricide was also the first demonic offering in human history. Thus, Cain's tragedy was not only moral but cosmic. He had opened a doorway to darkness, offering innocent blood to the shadow that had accompanied him since birth. Abel's death, described so briefly in Genesis, became in these ancient interpretations a revelation, the moment when evil entered the world, not from heaven, but from within humanity itself. The blood of Abel, spilling upon the ground, did not merely cry out to God. As the Bible says, it nourished Urgam, the invisible twin who had whispered to Cain for years. It was said that as Abel fell to the earth, the ground itself trembled and opened, drinking in his blood. In that fissure, Urgam sealed his victory, gaining strength from the stolen life. From then on, Abel's death was not seen merely as a family tragedy, but as the moment when a new kind of evil took root, one born not from the heavens, but from the human womb itself. The idea that the earth became cursed after the crime was understood as far more than divine punishment. God told Cain that the soil would no longer yield fruit for him, but in this version, that curse ran deeper. The earth had been infected, soaked with the breath and blood of Urgam. From then on, agriculture itself became a painful reminder. Every time a seed failed to sprout, every time a plant withered before bearing fruit, ancient farmers said it was the mark of the first sacrifice, the lingering trace of Urgam in the soil. The punishment of Cain, described in the Bible as a mark upon his body, and his exile from Eden, takes on a new meaning in this older tradition. It was not Cain alone who was cursed, it was Cain and his demonic twin bound together forever. Wherever Cain wandered, Urgam followed, unseen, whispering in his ear, reminding him that he had never truly acted alone. He had merely been the instrument of an ancient voice. Some versions claim that the famous Mark of Cain was not a physical scar at all, but the invisible presence of Urgam clinging to his shadow, perceptible only to those who could see beyond the human. Thus, Cain's exile was not just social banishment, but eternal companionship with the demon born beside him. When Cain departed east of Eden into the land of Nod, the journey was described as a double pilgrimage, Cain with a body, Urgam without one. There, the cursed lineage began not because Cain founded cities and crafts, as the Bible recounts, but because his descendants carried within them the echo of that first shadow. In this interpretation, the first fratricide did not only inaugurate human violence, it introduced into history a primordial demon, born not of God, nor of the later hell, but from the human womb itself. A faceless twin, the first shadow that demanded blood. After the murder of Abel and Cain's exile, Urgam's figure took on a central role in explaining the origin of human evil in certain ancient traditions. In the Bible, Cain's curse appears as the consequence of his own act. But in the apocryphal and Mesopotamian versions, the hand that lifted the stone or the weapon was guided by another will, the voice of the invisible twin. For many, this changed everything. It meant that humanity's failure was not born of one man's weakness, but that from its very beginning, humanity had been accompanied by a shadow, an inseparable double representing the urge toward destruction. Urgam was thus seen as the first demon born of humankind, different from the fallen angels who descended from heaven. He was not a foreign spirit, but part of human nature itself. Over the following centuries, echoes of this interpretation survived in different forms. Some Gnostic texts spoke of a dark twin that lived within every person, an inner brother who pushed the soul toward transgression. Later, rabbinic commentaries even hinted that Cain had not acted alone, but under the influence of a malicious spirit that had been with him since birth. Even in Islamic traditions, where Cain is known as Qabil, there are versions that mention a whispering spirit that led him to kill his brother Habil. Though the name Urgam is absent, the concept of demonic whisper guiding the first murder persists. In Mesopotamia, Urgam was remembered not only as the cause of Abel's death, but as the source of the first curse upon the earth itself. For an agricultural civilization, the idea that the land no longer yielded fruit to Cain's descendants explained more than divine punishment. It explained why humanity's labor was always tied to suffering. The soil was not ungrateful by chance, they said. It had been nourished with innocent blood. Every failed harvest, every famine, every devastating storm was seen as an echo of that first demonic sacrifice. Thus, the myth explained not only the first crime, but the enduring pain in humanity's relationship with nature. In later centuries, Urgam became a symbol of the dark double that every human being carries within. Medieval Christian philosophers interpreted him as a kind of prefiguration of Satan, but with one crucial difference. Satan was a fallen angel. Urgam was something closer, more terrifying, because he had been born from the same womb as humankind. His existence implied that evil did not always come from outside, but could grow from within as an invisible, inseparable twin. In Middle Eastern oral traditions, people even said that every person has a hidden brother who walks beside them, whispering temptations, and that life's true moral struggle is learning to resist his voice. Today, though Urgam's name does not appear in official sacred texts, scholars of comparative religion cite him as an example of how ancient peoples explained the dual nature of humanity. For them, it was not enough to blame an individual. They recognized that violence was written into the human story from the very beginning. The legend of Cain's demonic twin reminds us that the first crime was never seen merely as a human act, but as an involuntary pact with a shadow or darkness born at the same moment as life itself. That is why some still call Urgum the true first demon, the one who came neither from heaven nor from hell, but from the heart of humankind. The tunnels of the Monastery of Lorvão. The Monastery of Lorvão, located in the region of Pennacoba in central Portugal, traces its origins back to the 9th century. Its true splendor, however, began in the 11th century, when it was reformed under the Benedictine rule. At that time, the Kingdom of Portugal, newly consolidated after its independence from Leon in 1139 under Afonso Henriques, was in the midst of defining its territorial and spiritual identity. Monasteries became key centers of political, cultural, and religious organization, and among them, Lorvão stood out as one of the most influential. Its location in a fertile valley surrounded by rivers and forests made it a strategic site both for agricultural life and for spiritual retreat. From very early on, Lorvão was seen not only as a place of prayer and contemplation, but also as a hub of cultural production. In medieval Europe, monasteries were the guardians of knowledge. Monks copied, translated, and preserved texts that might otherwise have been lost amid wars and plagues. Lorvão was no exception. Under the Benedictine rule, it established a prestigious scriptorium, where liturgical manuscripts, chronicles, and scholarly treatises were meticulously copied. What made Lorvão exceptional was its role as a cultural bridge between the Christian and Muslim worlds. During the era of the Reconquista, when cities such as Toledo, Córdoba, and Seville shifted from Muslim to Christian control, thousands of Arabic manuscripts in science, philosophy, mathematics, and medicine were brought into Christian lands. Lorvão received a significant number of these manuscripts, and many were translated into Latin, integrating that vast body of knowledge into European culture. This silent labor was crucial. Without monasteries like Lorvão, much of the classical wisdom preserved by Arab scholars would have been lost forever. The monastery's scriptorium reached such a level of excellence that its illuminated codices are still preserved in museums and libraries today, standing as a testament to its cultural richness. Among them, one stands out: the Apocalypse of Lorvão, an 11th century manuscript filled with remarkable miniatures, regarded as a jewel of Portuguese medieval art. This surviving work proves that Lorvão's monks did more than copy texts. They developed a visual language of their own, rich in symbols and meaning. Within this atmosphere of intense intellectual activity, the presence of both monks and nuns as scribes was common. They worked in silence under strict discipline, transcribing word by word what was considered the embodiment of divine truth. For them, copying a text was not merely mechanical, it was a spiritual act. To reproduce the written word was to extend God's work on earth. Yet that same sacred act could become dangerous when the text being copied strayed from orthodoxy. A single deviation, a suspicious note, a too literal translation could transform what seemed an exercise in scholarship into an accusation of heresy. Another key element of the monastery was its underground tunnels. Like many medieval complexes, Lorvão possessed corridors carved beneath its foundations. Their exact origin remains uncertain. Some historians believe they were built during the period of repopulation to store grain and provisions. Others claim they were defensive passages meant to allow escape in case of attack. Whatever their purpose, records from the Middle Ages mention these dark, winding galleries connecting various sections of the monastery, many of which were never fully explored and remain sealed to this day. Their silent, mysterious presence created the perfect setting for popular imagination to fill them with secrets, hidden treasures, and restless spirits. In medieval thought, subterranean spaces were liminal realms, places where the sacred and the profane could overlap, where lost souls might wander, and where contact with the forbidden seemed dangerously close. These four elements, the founding of the monastery during Portugal's consolidation, its role as a center of translation, its active scriptorium, and the unexplored tunnels beneath formed the solid historical foundation upon which legend would later grow. It was within this world of silence, prayer, and shadow that a haunting story emerged. The story of a nun who, by crossing the invisible line between faith and forbidden knowledge, was condemned not only to disappear physically, but to remain forever trapped beneath the Monastery of Lorvão. During the 11th century, the Monastery of Lorvão reached its height as a cultural center, largely thanks to the arrival of manuscripts from Al-Andalus and other Islamic territories. As Christian forces expanded southward, entire libraries were confiscated and transported to the northern kingdoms. While Toledo became the great hub of translation, Lorvão also received part of this flow of knowledge. The Arabic codices contained everything from Avicenna's treatises on medicine to the philosophical works of Aristotle, transmitted through the commentaries of Averroes. There were also compendiums on mathematics, astronomy, and alchemy, some of which, according to tradition, originated from Syria and Damascus, where ancient classical learning had been preserved and enriched. For the medieval mind, these texts were both a treasure and a danger. They offered immense knowledge, yet not all their contents could be reconciled with Christian orthodoxy. It is in this context that the legend introduces the figure of a female scribe, whose real identity was never confirmed by official documents, but whose presence lived on through the monastery's oral tradition. In Lorvão, the female monastic orders played an active role in intellectual life. Many nuns received training in reading and writing, and some worked directly in the scriptorium copying manuscripts. The young nun at the heart of the story was known for her remarkable linguistic skill. She mastered Latin, essential for any scribe, but had also learned the rudiments of Arabic, making her an invaluable asset for translating fragments of the newly arrived texts from Iberia. Her dedication set her apart, and some accounts describe her as curious and unconventional, drawn toward that which lay beyond accepted boundaries. It was this nun, according to legend, who received a manuscript unlike any other. The codex contained no visible ink. Its pages appeared blank, yet when one stared long enough, faint traces seemed to emerge like ghostly fingerprints pressed into the parchment. Tradition called it the manuscript without ink, a book that, it was said, could not be read with open eyes, but only when the reader closed them, allowing the words to form directly in the mind. It was said the text contained living words that spoke to the reader's conscience and revealed forbidden truths. Today, such descriptions might sound metaphorical, a symbol of inner revelation, but in the 11th century, it was viewed as a disturbing anomaly, something neither divine nor entirely heretical. Fascinated, the young scribe began to copy it, transcribing invisible pages that only she seemed able to see. Her behavior did not go unnoticed. In the tightly regulated atmosphere of a Benedictine monastery where any deviation could be read as disobedience, rumors of heresy spread quickly. Other monks and scribes noticed that she worked on a codex with no visible letters, and some swore they had seen her sitting for hours in silence, eyes closed, as though praying, but in truth, writing what she saw inside her mind. Such behavior was deemed strange, and suspicion grew that she was copying heretical texts brought from Damascus. The accusations were based not on evidence, but on fear of what could not be explained. In a community where control of the written word meant control of faith, a manuscript that could not be read was a perilous thing. Here, according to legend, the story reached its turning point. A gifted scribe, torn between the desire to know and the boundaries of obedience, accused of having crossed an invisible line. The seed of myth had been planted. A woman condemned, not for what she wrote in ink, but for what she copied in silence from pages that no one else could read. When the suspicions finally reached the ears of the monastery's superiors, there was no turning back. In a community ruled by the Benedictine order and closely watched by episcopal authority, there was no room for ambiguity. Any sign of disobedience, especially one hinting at heresy, had to be silenced swiftly. The testimonies describing the young nun spending hours with a blank codex, working with her eyes closed, lost in visions, were taken as proof of dangerous deviation. There was no formal Inquisition yet in Portugal, but she was subjected to an internal process within the convent, one rarely documented in official records. According to tradition, her punishment was as extreme as it was secret. She was not expelled or handed over to secular authorities, nor was she burned at the stake, as later heretics would be. Instead, the decision was to erase her existence without scandal. She was led down into the monastery's underground tunnels, those damp, dark corridors beneath the church and cloisters, and there, she was sealed alive behind stone and lime. They closed the entrance with bricks, entombing not only her body, but her memory. The symbolism of the punishment was horrifying, buried beneath the very foundations of the community she had served, as a silent warning of what awaited those who strayed from obedience. According to legend, the nun died slowly, alone, holding the parchment of the manuscript without ink in her hands. It was not only a physical punishment, it was a spiritual erasure. Without a tomb, without a funeral, without any official record, her soul was believed to be trapped in a state of limbo, unable to ascend. It was then that people began to whisper that her spirit had remained confined within the tunnels. Monks who lived in Lorvão centuries later claimed that, at night, they could hear footsteps echoing in the underground corridors, soft sounds, like sandals scraping against stone. Others said they heard faint sobbing, or the unmistakable scratch of a quill writing on parchment, as if someone were still copying invisible pages. These testimonies could never be proven, but they were frequent enough to take root in the monastery's collective memory. The legend added one last chilling detail. The only way to free the nun's soul was to decipher the manuscript without ink, the very book that had led to her damnation. According to the myth, the manuscript remains hidden somewhere within the sealed tunnels, waiting to be found. But its reading comes with an impossible condition. It can only be read with one's eyes closed. The reader would not see words on the parchment, but visions forming directly inside the mind, revealing truths that do not belong to the world of the living. For medieval monks, such an idea was nothing short of a pact with the forbidden. For that reason, the tunnels were sealed, and entry was forbidden for centuries. This prohibition was not only for safety, fearing collapse or getting lost, but also for spiritual reasons. They believed that whoever ventured inside might awaken the presence that haunted those underground corridors. And so, within the walls of Lorvão, a haunting story took root. A woman condemned not for what she wrote in ink, but for what she dared to copy from invisible pages. A soul buried beneath the earth, still crying for release, and a book that could only reveal itself in the darkness of the mind. In the centuries that followed, the story of the faceless nun and the manuscript without ink lived on in the oral tradition of the monastery and nearby villages. As time passed, the tunnels were sealed even further, not only to prevent accidents, but because fear grew. Novices and travelers spoke of faint lights moving beneath the stone floors, or muffled murmurs echoing through the night. Official records mentioned the need to preserve the tunnels, but locals knew the real reason: the terror of what might still dwell there. By forbidding anyone to enter, the monastery turned the tunnels into a sacred taboo, a forbidden space where the unknown became stronger than the real. During later centuries, as Portugal went through political and religious crises, the legend evolved with each era. In the 16th century, during the rise of the Inquisition, people said the nun had been a victim of an exemplary punishment for copying heretical texts. In the 17th century, when the monastery was reformed and converted into a convent for women, some nuns claimed to hear the faint scratching of quills and the rustle of invisible pages at night. These stories never left private circles, but they reinforced the feeling that Lorvão harbored an unresolved secret. In the 19th century, Romantic writers and foreign travelers rediscovered the story, calling it one of Portugal's black monastic legends and comparing it to ghostly tales from other European abbeys. Today, the Monastery of Lorvão is recognized as a national monument and part of Portugal's cultural heritage. Yet the legend of its tunnels still lives on. Visitors hear guides speak of sealed passages and underground chambers that have never been opened. Locals from Pennacoba claim that, on perfectly silent nights, they can hear cries rising from beneath the hill as if someone were still trying to reach the surface. Others say that those who sleep near the monastery dream of blank pages that, when they close their eyes, fill with words they cannot understand. For many, the myth serves as a metaphor for what Lorvão once was, a place where the light of knowledge coexisted with the shadow of censorship and where the search for truth could become a path to eternal condemnation. Today, the legend of the faceless nun and the manuscript without ink remains part of the region's collective memory, both a warning and a symbol. A warning against the dangers of seeking what is forbidden, and a symbol of the enduring power of hidden knowledge, surviving even under centuries of silence. The tunnels of the Monastery of Lorvão, still largely unexplored, stand as a boundary between history and legend, between what archaeology might one day reveal and what perhaps should remain forever in the realm of myth.